You remember that when it's like say hello, Gracie, or say goodnight, Gracie?
Yeah.
You know, say hi, P.
Hi, P.
Hi, P. All right, so
Hi,
welcome
P.
to the Realm of Ideas is Free to
Yeah.
All. This is me, Bruce, and
Julie.
we are here with the preview for episode 62. Let's see, 62? Let me see. Let me go on my
Also
notes.
known as George and Gracie.
Oh, yeah. Episode 63, Educational Institutions. And basically, when I was thinking about this, I had two kind of conflicting things but they speak the same point. One was from, Alfred North Whitehead's Self-Reliance, the opening section, Harvard philosophy professor, Harvard philosophy man, and of course another great Harvard philosophy man, Alfred North Whitehead, who is famous for the quote that was said about him was the first time he had ever attended a lecture on philosophy. It was one that he presented. So anyway, I mean, Whitehead is one of the great thinkers of all time, and I think it'll probably take hundreds of years for us to really truly understand that. I think that he's bigger than science, bigger than philosophy, and there's an inkling among people who've made very specialized careerists. I mean, his thinking is actually a deep critique of the lack of connectedness between kind of natural, what we would call, I would call like natural judgment. I think that he resurrects the idea of the natural philosopher, which had kind of like disappeared for kind of a couple hundred years, but I think he brings it back. Anyway, let me digress a little less. But here's the piece from Self-Reliance. In every work of genius, we recognize our own rejected thoughts. They come back to us with a certain alienated majesty. Great works of art have no more affecting lesson for us than this. They teach us to abide by our spontaneous impression with good-humored inflexibility than most when the whole cry of voices is on the other side. Else tomorrow a stranger will say with masterly good sense precisely what we have thought and felt all the time, and we shall be forced to take with shame our own opinion from another. Now, I know the person sitting next to me understands that that is never a mistake she will make, because there has never been a person as firm in her convictions as my loved one.
That's me.
That's you. So
That's
now,
why they call
here's
me firm in my convictions, Julie.
that's like your middle name. That's like your first middle name.
Yeah.
Yeah. Your second middle name is loved one. All right, and here I think is this is one of the most profound and important things that has ever been said related to trying to keep education a fresh and prosperous and kind of enlightened approach. In the Aims of Education, Whitehead says, education is the acquisition of the art of the utilization of knowledge, not the gaining of knowledge, right? Not the possession of it, but the way in which one enacts it. The way, and in fact, Aims of Education, I was reading it back this week because I was kind of looking to be able to kind of refresh myself with these two pieces. And one of the things that was really, truly profound was that when I had read Aims of Education before, probably was the first thing I read of Whitehead. And then when I went into kind of Process and Reality and Adventures of Ideas and, other books, I kind of came to understand the process. But then when I looked back at here, I saw that this really manifests the idea of process thinking before it was really cultivated, because this book comes earlier than the other pieces. But that statement, education is the acquisition of the art of the utilization. It's the utilization of knowledge. It's having the ability to utilize those things, to find those things that are profound. Somewhere between these two quotes, I will actually have a deeper piece that I will kind of read somewhere in between those two. But in terms of educational institutions, I have spent my fair share in educational institutions as a student and as an academic. Julie has actually joined me in some of those adventures as we've kind of ventured into some of these places, kind of like academies and institutions, places like Well, I mean, we don't need to mention them, but I mean, like the people know who we are.
You have certainly heard of all of them.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I actually like probably the one that everyone would know would be the American Museum of Natural History.
Yeah,
but I mean,
you
again,
can
there's other
say
ones. I
it's
mean, the
not a
National
secret.
Gallery,
the
kind of like
National Gallery of Art,
right,
the
exactly.
New York Public Library.
Yeah, I mean, and educational institutions. But I think actually one of the things I enjoy most is kind of like the freedom to kind of be outside it, and it's kind of because of these things that we've kind of come to. I've come to this realization. Julie may think otherwise, but anyway, this piece this week will be about, I'd say, a critique of the nature of the educational institution. And it's not so much, again, one of the things that Whitehead kind of says, and it's very important, is in order to find that place which is to be, one can't copy, one can't go back to the past to create the future. Like he said, the Greeks were not copyists. No one of consequence is a copyist.
No.
And I think what happens is
we're an originist.
Yes, exactly. Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
An originist. So I think the point is, if something has, a lot of times people think if someone is basically lamenting a concern, like in the case of aims of education, Whitehead's talking about the inertial nature of a static, disconnected educational institution. And I think his point was there needs to be that significant conversation about how to get unstuck. I see a homogeneity. I see a lack of championing and congratulation and commending genius and ingenuity. I see a lowest common denominator of thinking, and I see this in places, and I kind of find that it's concerning to me. So anyway, I've kind of talked for 7 minutes. I'm sorry. Talk as long as you want, my little one.
Well, I have found that where education has failed is its inability to transport the student or the acolyte or the apprentice out of that particular room and into the realm of which it is ostensibly educating. And by that, I mean, let's take a typical course in invertebrate or vertebrate zoology, of which I have had a number, where you find yourself wall bound in a classroom, and it feels like any English classroom. It feels like any mathematics class. It has no persona. And this is something I've not heard talked about, that an episode of education, that a particular course should have its own identity, should actually command the air, command the floors and walls, and transport those who want to learn outside of that very, very small space, the peninsula one finds oneself on, or an island, and into the great arena of knowledge and thought. That if one is being inspired, one's mind will be transported by the professor, with the help of the professor, with the encouragement. One has to have a very fertile, very adventurous mind. And if anyone hasn't seen our program from last Saturday, the nature of the adventurous mind, there is a segue here, most potent and direct, which is that very few minds are that adventurous that they can completely self-generate in terms of education, that they need some kind of guidance, some kind of spark. I mean, a shepherd, not a dictator, not a totalitarian, not a disciplinarian, but that's all we are getting now. And we also have copyists. And the last thing that a student or an acolyte needs is to be taught by a copyist, because one will only be taught yet another copy of a copy of a copy. If one is to be taught well, one should be taught how to catch, process, and digest that very nourishing food, which is the original idea in all of its garnished glory.
Yeah, I love that.
Thank
And
you.
in fact, what I would say is that, like, a lot of
That was
times,
good, wasn't it?
that's brilliant. This is actually good. I
It's
would
going to be great.
no, it's going to be great
Yeah.
because I mean, so my feeling is,
Yeah.
I think because of the fact that we sense that in general, we sense that there's a concern. I'll hear people say we need to teach thinking, not teach things, and I agree with that.
Mhm.
But here's the problem with that approach: when you teach thinking, yes, but of what attitude? And how is that to be manifest? And I think that's the problem. What Whitehead did in Aims of Education, he did in Adventures of Ideas, was he set out the circumstance that he was contending with. And again, if we go back to Ortega, we can realize he said, "I am myself and my circumstance." The only thing that gives my formulations consequence is how they relate to my circumstance. So in that case, I think that's the part we're missing out. That thinking, just the same way that kind of like in the critique of Plato and Socrates and the critique of a static, disconnected ontological reality, was imposed process. And in that case, I mean, a 2,500-year-old concern was basically relieved. And in that case, Whitehead had that particular understanding of what that attitude is. Now, in a post antiquity ontological nature, in a kind of process related circumstance, what is the next manifestation of this circumstance? So that's the thing, is I don't know what that answer is, but I'm posing the question because I think it's valuable. So we've gotten to the point where we no longer can really, we understand the idea of a kind of like a static, disconnected, unconnected circumstance, of a kind of I don't know, dilettantism. So we have like the things that Ortega talks about the idea of the specialist is basically no different than the kind of like mass man or the rabble. So that's just it. So what this new thinking, right, or this evolution of thinking, has to come from a kind of a clear understanding of what is the attitude and how is it manifest of how that thinking is to take place. So give us our conclusions here, my loved one. And again, the hour that we'll talk about on Sunday will have none of this in it, because basically everything will be about the topic.
Mm-hmm.
This is basically just, giving you an overview, and we're not even going into the details.
No.
We're just kind of laying the groundwork.
This
here.
is an amuse-bouche.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
Yes.
So I can't even recall the last time I've been transported by an educator. I mean, all of the transporting has been done with my own, and I don't want to speak for Bruce, our own independent inquiries and reading and research. It would be a wonderful thing if educators were not so terrified to step away from the copybook, to step away from what is rote, and not to preach the same tired text over and over again, but to actually transport you to that very place wherein the particular topic lies. And that is a talent and a skill that I think very few in education possess.
Yeah, and I think one of the things is, like, there are times, and I guess I was really, when we talked about a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the history of science in the modern world, and we talked about the 17th century as the century of genius, and I was kind of I love the idea of dynasties. I love the idea of greatness, of genius, and of consequence. So anytime you think of a golden age, you always wonder, like, why are not all ages golden ages? What is the process? What is the mechanism that allows us to kind of like fall into retrogression? And I think to myself, was it such that, like, for instance, Einstein and Curie and Planck and all these Rutherford and all these people were around at the same time? Or was it they all came to understand what had been given to them as an opportunity by the previous people like Maxwell, to the point where the idea was the paradigm shift was such that they could all focus on this new perspective. So is the idea that the golden age comes from basically geniuses, or the fact that the genius has become manifest because someone has opened the door to a perspective that they all can kind of gravitate to and understand this is what needs to be the circumstance? Don't know.
That's a fine question.
Okay.
I mean,
all right. So, all right.
yes.
All right. So that's our preview. Long-winded. My fault, because Julie talked for like 2 minutes here. Anyway, the realm of ideas is free to all my friends, and to benefit of us all, for us to keep it this way.
Precisely.
Thank you.
Thank you.